Well, this year's UN Climate Summit has ended with a last-minute agreement to provide $300 billion annually by 2035 to help the most vulnerable nations deal with climate change. While some delegates applauded the outcome of the COP29 negotiations in Azerbaijan, others said the funding fell far short of what's actually needed. Developing nations and climate activists believe a minimum of $1.3 trillion per year is essential to keep the planet's average temperature rise under 1.5 degrees Celsius. I'd like to welcome Henna Hundal now, the National Coordinator of Climate Live USA. She was named a key opinion leader on climate and health at COP27 2 years ago, and we're happy to get her views on COP29 now. Welcome to DW. Just first of all, I'd like to get your thoughts on what was agreed in Baku.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Now, we know that what it was agreed at Baku was an agreement, but the quality of the agreement matters. So we ended up with $300 billion of climate finance, but we know what was needed was $1 trillion by 2030 and $1.3 trillion by 2035. So do we have a pact? Sure. Do we have some measure of agreement that signals hope that the world can work together on the climate crisis? Sure. But have we fallen measurably short of what's actually required to contend with the impacts of climate change on the ground and enable developing countries to transition away from fossil fuels? I would say probably not. And I think that's the source of a lot of concern and consternation among colleagues after emerging from this conference, realizing that actually filling up those climate finance coffers is going to be even more difficult than we thought it would be.
Let's talk a bit more about this question of money, because we've had a lot of comments on YouTube in the last day saying that this money is a complete waste that risks being lost to corruption. What would you say to people who hold these types of views?
Well, I would certainly not say that it's a huge waste. I mean, let's take the example of the United States, which is certainly a developed country, so it doesn't quite fit into this paradigm of climate finance being discussed at the COP conferences. But take, for example, Hurricane Helene, which impacted North Carolina so devastatingly this year. The governor of North Carolina came out and said that that damage amounted to around $53 billion. And that's from one extreme weather disaster in a developed country that frankly has the resources, whether it decides to muster them or not, to actually contend with the impacts. Now think about all of the climate change driven disasters occurring around the world in just this year, and then think about those projections for the next 10 years. I mean, this climate finance is essential to deal with those challenges, in addition to allowing developing countries to transition to greener economies when they don't always have the resources to do that. Now, I completely understand the consternation around corruption, and I certainly would not want any of these dollars to get entangled into that. But I think it would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater to say that we don't need climate finance at all.
Now, as I understand, you specialise on the impact that climate change has on health. If we look at this particular aspect, what did you hope to see more of in the COP29 agreement?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, because I think that has actually been a bright spot of the COP conferences. We saw last year, for example, at COP28, there was the first ever dedicated health day in Dubai, where you saw health ministers, healthcare practitioners convene and aim to be a part of these climate discussions. And we've seen that only magnify at COP29. And I think that's ever so critical when we try to imagine how can we connect the climate crisis with people on the ground, really make our messaging crystal clear, not such that people think climate change is some esoteric and nebulous concept that suited up delegates are talking about at a conference thousands of miles away, but actually relates to the here and now and to everyday life. And when we look at, for example, extreme heat and how heat waves are becoming longer, more frequent, and lasting for a greater duration of time, we look at the range of health impacts there, especially for infants and the elderly. We think about stuff like, tropical cyclones increasing in intensity and leading to potentially waterborne diseases and vector-borne disease transmission. There's so many ways that the climate crisis impacts public health directly, and that's a way that I think we can get more involved in the crisis altogether.
Henna Hundal, thank you so much for your time. That was Henna Hundal, the National Coordinator of Climate Live USA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Let's bring in Kenyan climate activist Eric Njuguna, who's just returned home to Nairobi from the COP summit in Baku. Eric, what are your thoughts on the agreement?
Yes, I think COP29 was a colossal failure and a stab in the back to communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. Developed countries are only committing to lead to mobilize $300 billion, which is a drop in the ocean compared to the trillions of dollars needed by developing countries to address mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. There was no grant commitment, meaning that developing countries could pay back to developed countries for a crisis they had the least role in causing, and it exacerbates the debt crisis in the global south. There was no definition of climate finance exactly, and this is really important because we have seen developed countries over the past years, even like Italy, for instance, paying retailers to open gelato shops in Asia. And there was the developed countries led by the US, the UK, and the EU are also not willing to take responsibility for loss and damage at a time when communities on the front lines of the climate crisis are facing severe impacts as a result of a crisis they had their least role in causing. All of this is because of global north countries abdicating their historical responsibility and moral obligation to pay up for the climate crisis.
Right. Eric, and what implications will this deal have for your country, Kenya?
Kenya is on the front lines of the climate crisis. Just last year, there was a severe drought that led to millions losing their lives and livelihoods as a result of the climate crisis. Just this year again, there was severe droughts. Hundreds, tens lost their lives. And as a result, these people had the least role in causing the climate crisis here to bear the largest burden. And global north countries refuse to take responsibility. In the end, the message I'm bringing back home from COP29 is that global north countries showed the middle finger to communities here in Nairobi and in Kenya in general who are facing the climate crisis.
Right. Eric, we're just running out of time, but you've been to many of these events over time. What would you like to see going forward that will ensure concrete outcomes?
Yes, this COP had a huge presence of the fossil fuel industry. 1,773 fossil fuel lobbyists were present at the COP, and we need to see a COP that kicks polluters out and lets people in. We need people at the heart of these negotiations.
Climate activist Eric Njuguna, we appreciate your thoughts. Many thanks for speaking to us.